So, let's just dive right into one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask. Is the world that you see all around you, is it actually real? For literally thousands of years, this question has kept some of the smartest people in history up at night. Let's see if we can untangle it a little.
Is this the real life, or is it just fantasy? Freddie Mercury definitely wasn't the first person to ask that. It's a question that gets to the very heart of what it means to be, well, us. How do you really know, that what you see, what you touch, what you feel, is the real deal?
Long before we had ideas about virtual reality, philosophers were using other metaphors to get at this. The ancient Chinese thinker Zhuangzi, he had this famous dream that he was a butterfly. And when he woke up, he just wasn't sure. Was he a man who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or was he now a butterfly dreaming he was a man? And that kind of deep uncertainty, well, that leads us to the most famous metaphor of them all.
And yeah, that's probably the most powerful and enduring metaphor for this whole question. It comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato with his incredible Allegory of the Cave.
Okay, so the setup is actually pretty simple, but the implications are just massive. Imagine some prisoners who've been chained up in a cave their entire lives, forced to face a blank wall. Now, behind them, there's a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people are walking by, carrying things which cast shadows on the wall. For those prisoners, those flickering shadows, they aren't like reality, they are reality. It's the only world they have ever known.
What's so wild is how fresh, how modern this idea still feels, even after 2,400 years. I mean, look at this updated picture. That could be us, right? Sitting there with our own headsets on, staring at our own personally curated walls of shadows, totally unaware of what the real world just outside our little bubble might look like.
So Plato pushes it further. He asks, what if one of those prisoners was freed? They'd be dragged out into the sunlight, they'd see the real world, and finally understand that the shadows were just shadows. But then, what if they went back into the cave to tell the others? Would anyone even believe them? Plato thinks they'd rather suffer anything than go back to living in that ignorance. And that's the gut punch question for us. Would you choose a comfortable illusion or a potentially painful truth?
Okay, so now let's jump forward a couple thousand years. We're going to leave the ancient cave and step into the digital one. Because modern physics, believe it or not, has given us a whole new language to talk about Plato's shadows, the language of information, of bits, and simulations.
So this is the big connection, right here. On the left, you've got Plato's shadows. That's the reality for the prisoners. And on the right, you've got this modern idea from the physicist John Wheeler called it from bit. The basic gist is that every physical it, you, me, this planet, everything, fundamentally comes from bits of information.
So what exactly is this it from bit idea? Well, it's a hypothesis, but a powerful one. It says that the entire physical universe, from the teeniest, tiniest quark to the most massive galaxy, is at its most fundamental level just information. It's literally made of bits. Think about it like a video game. The world in the game feels real to the characters, but we know it's all just made of code, of bits and bytes. This is saying our universe might be the same way.
Here's a cool way to visualize it. At the very bottom level, all you have is what looks like random dust, this chaotic cloud of information, just ones and zeros. But somehow, out of that randomness, a structured, coherent world pops into existence. It's kind of like the pixels on your screen. If you get super close, they're just little colored dots that don't mean anything. But when you step back, they form a clear, meaningful picture.
Okay, but here is the most important question. If we find out that quarks are made of bits, does that make them fake? Does that make us less real? And the answer from science seems to be a pretty firm no. Think about it. When we discover that a solid wooden table is actually made of atoms that are almost entirely empty space, did the table suddenly stop being real? Could you not put your coffee on it? Of course not. In the same way, finding out that quarks are made of bits doesn't erase the reality of quarks or atoms or the table. It just adds another, deeper layer to it.
But wait, what if reality isn't built from bits of information, like a computer? The absolutely bizarre world of quantum physics points to another, maybe even stranger possibility. What if reality is built not from things, but from relationships?
The physicist Carlo Rovelli has this just beautiful way of putting it. He says, we should think of the world we touch as a fabric that is woven together by relations, that reality isn't a collection of separate, independent things, but a web of their interactions.
Now let that sink in for a minute. In this view, an electron doesn't just have a specific location all on its own. It only gets a location when it interacts with something else, when it's measured or bumps into another particle. Reality becomes what Rivoli calls a never-ending game of mirrors, where things only get their properties by reflecting off each other. To exist is to interact. It's a mind-bending idea.
All right, so let's just recap how science has kind of systematically blown up our simple intuitive picture of the world, what the philosopher David Chalmers calls our Edenic reality. You know, that Garden of Eden world we thought we lived in. First, we learn absolute space and time. Nope, they don't exist. Solid objects, they're mostly empty space. Colors? Not actually in the objects themselves, but a super complex interaction between light, surfaces, and our brains. You could almost say, as Chalmers does, that the tree of science, well, it got us cast out of that simple Eden.
So, where does all this leave us? I mean, if our gut feeling about the world is wrong, and reality might be made of information or just pure relationships, is anything real? Well, this is where we can start pulling these threads together into a really elegant idea.
So the first conclusion is kind of unavoidable and a little blunt. That Edenic reality, that simple, perfect world of solid things with definite colors and absolute time, that world is an illusion. It just doesn't line up with what we know.
But, and this is the absolute crucial next step, that does not mean that reality isn't real. Just because our simple picture was wrong doesn't mean we're living in a total fantasy.
This brings us to this really satisfying middle ground called imperfect realism. And the idea is this. While the world is not exactly as it seems to us, our perceptions aren't just random hallucinations either. They're successfully latching on to a real underlying structure. So when you see the color red, your experience of red isn't fake. It's your brain's imperfect, but real and useful translation of a specific real wavelength of light out there in the world.
And this brings us right back around, full circle, to Plato's cave. Look, the shadows on the wall are illusions. In a way, they are not the real objects. But, and here's the key, they aren't nothing. They are caused by something real. They are a true, if simplified, representation of the structure of those real objects. And maybe that's what our perceptions are. The color, the solidity, the feeling of time. Maybe they are the shadows cast on the walls of our minds by the true underlying structure of reality, whatever that turns out to be.
So that leaves us with one last, really provocative thought to chew on. If our entire experience, our lives, our science, everything, is really about interacting with the structure of reality, does it ultimately matter what that structure is made of? Whether it's vibrating strings, or quantum fields, or lines of computer code? Maybe, at the end of the day, the shadows on the wall are the only part of reality that can ever truly matter to us.